My 5-year-old grandson whispered to me, "Grandpa, what's a nursing home?" Mom and Dad said they're sending you there on vacation after your trip. Can I go too? I immediately canceled my trip and did something instead. 2 days later. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I was folding my favorite flannel shirts into the old leather suitcase when Ryan appeared in my bedroom doorway, his small fingers wrapped around a half-eaten peanut butter sandwich. At 5 years old, he had this way of showing up at the most unexpected moments, like a little shadow with bright blue eyes and an endless supply of questions. "Grandpa, are you really going on vacation?" he asked, climbing onto my bed and leaving crumbs on the quilt his grandmother had made 40 years ago. I smiled, continuing to pack my fishing gear. "Just a few days with the boys up at Lake Morrison, buddy. Nothing too exciting." The annual trip had been a tradition for almost 15 years now. 3 old friends escaping to a cabin, telling the same stories, and pretending we could still catch fish like we did in our 20s. Ryan watched me pack with the intense concentration only children possess. "Mom says you're going on 2 vacations. He said casually, swinging his legs over the edge of the bed. Something in his tone made me pause. I set down the tackle box and turned to face him. "2 vacations?" "Uh-huh." He took another bite of his sandwich, completely unaware of the chill that had just run down my spine. "She said after your fishing trip, you're going on another vacation to a special place just for grandpas and grandmas." My hand stopped moving entirely. The room seemed to grow smaller, the afternoon light filtering through the curtains suddenly feeling harsh against my skin. "What kind of special place, Ryan?" "I don't know what it's called." He shrugged, kicking his feet rhythmically against the bed frame. "But Mom showed me pictures on her computer. It has lots of old people and they have their own rooms and people who help them eat and take baths." The words hit me like a physical blow. My 62-year-old body suddenly felt ancient, fragile in a way it never had before. I sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, my mind racing to process what my grandson had just innocently revealed. Did Mom say when the second vacation would happen? I managed to keep my voice steady, though my heart was pounding against my ribs. "After you come back from fishing," Ryan said matter-of-factly. "She said I could visit you there sometimes, but not stay overnight because it's only for old people." He paused, studying my face with those perceptive blue eyes. "Grandpa, what's a nursing home? Is that the same thing as a vacation place for grandpas?" The room started spinning slightly. Nursing home. The words echoed in my head like a death sentence. My own son, Carl, the boy I'd raised alone after his mother died, the man I'd put through college and supported through his early career struggles, was planning to ship me off to a nursing home, and he was calling it a vacation to make himself feel better about it. It's a place where some older people go when they need extra help," I said slowly, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. Ryan nodded seriously. "Mom said you might forget things sometimes and need people to remind you to take your medicine and stuff. But you don't forget things, Grandpa. You remember everything, like where we hid the treasure map last summer and what my favorite bedtime story is. Out of the mouths of babes. My 5-year-old grandson could see what my 38-year-old son apparently couldn't or chose not to see. I wasn't declining, wasn't forgetting things, wasn't becoming a burden. I was just inconvenient." "Ryan, honey," I said carefully, "can you do Grandpa a favor and not tell Mom and Dad that we talked about this? Let's keep it our secret for now." He grinned, delighted to be included in grown-up secrets. "Okay, Grandpa. Are you going to surprise them?" If only he knew. Something like that, buddy. After Ryan skipped off to find his mother, I sat alone in my bedroom, staring at the half-packed suitcase. The fishing trip suddenly felt like a cruel joke, a distraction, a way to get me out of the house so they could finalize their plans. How long had they been discussing this behind my back? How many conversations had I missed? How many meaningful looks had been exchanged over my head during family dinners? I walked to my dresser and picked up the framed photo sitting there. Carl's graduation from law school, his arm around my shoulders, both of us grinning at the camera. I'd been so proud that day, so sure I'd raised a good man. Now I wondered if I'd raised a stranger. The phone rang, jarring me from my thoughts. Carl's name appeared on the caller ID. "Hey, Dad, just checking in about your trip tomorrow. You all packed and ready?" His voice sounded normal, cheerful even, no hint of guilt or deception. "Almost," I said, testing him. You know, I've been thinking maybe I should cancel. Not feeling quite up to it. Oh no, Dad, you can't cancel now. The guys are counting on you, and you've been looking forward to this for months. Besides, a little getaway will do you good. A little getaway. The irony wasn't lost on me. He needed me gone, needed me out of the way, while he and Linda made their final arrangements. You're probably right, I said. I'll see you when I get back. Absolutely. We'll be here when you get home. The lie came so easily to him. When I got back, would there even be a home to return to? Or would I find my belongings packed and a one-way ticket to wherever they'd decided I belonged? After hanging up, I made a decision that would change everything. I walked back to my suitcase, began unpacking my clothes, and reached for my phone. The fishing trip could wait. My old friends would understand. They'd probably done enough lying to their own families to recognize the signs. I had more important things to do than pretend everything was normal. I needed to find out exactly what my son was planning, and I needed to do it before I became another forgotten old man warehoused in a place I never chose. The war had begun, and Carl had no idea his father was about to become his most formidable opponent. The next morning, I called my fishing buddies and told them I'd come down with something. Tom's voice carried that knowing tone men our age develop after decades of reading between the lines. "Everything okay, Dave? You sound different." "I just need to take care of some things at home," I said, watching through my kitchen window as Carl's silver sedan pulled into my driveway right on schedule. Every Tuesday and Friday, like clockwork, he'd stop by to check on me. "Well, you know where to find us if you need anything," Tom said. "And Dave, trust your gut. It's kept us all alive this long." Carl's key turned in my front door. When had I given him that key? I couldn't remember, which bothered me more than I cared to admit. Maybe that was part of their plan, to make me question my own memory. "Dad?" Carl's voice echoed through the house. "I brought you some groceries." I met him in the kitchen where he was unpacking bags with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Lots of soft foods, yogurt, applesauce, soup, nothing that required much chewing. When had my grocery list become a menu for someone with digestive issues? "You didn't need to do that," I said, watching him arrange items in my refrigerator with particular care. "I know you forget to eat properly when you're on your own," he said, without looking at me. "Linda thought you might need some easier options. Forget to eat." There it was again. The casual assumption that I was declining, becoming incapable of basic self-care. I'd been cooking for myself since his mother died 23 years ago, but apparently that was now beyond my abilities. "I eat just fine, Carl." He turned to me with that patient smile I was beginning to hate. "Of course you do, Dad. I just worry, you know. We all do." We all do. Who was we all? How many people were discussing my supposed deterioration behind my back? "I rescheduled your doctor's appointment, by the way," he continued, closing the refrigerator door with a soft thud. "Moved it to next Wednesday instead of Thursday. I thought it would be better to batch your appointments together." I stared at him. "I didn't ask you to reschedule anything." "I know, but Dr. Peterson's office called me since I'm listed as your emergency contact. They said you seemed confused about the dates when you called." Another lie, smooth as silk. I'd never called Dr. Peterson's office about any dates. I kept meticulous track of my appointments in the calendar by my phone, the same system I'd used for 40 years in business. But now Carl was managing my medical schedule, and apparently I was too confused to handle it myself. "Carl, I never called about any confusion with dates." He paused in his unpacking, and for just a moment I saw something flicker across his face. Annoyance, frustration that I was pushing back. "Maybe you forgot, Dad. It happens to all of us." But it didn't happen to me, not yet anyway, and the fact that he was so insistent that it did made my skin crawl. After Carl left, I sat in my living room and began to think, really think, for the first time in months. How many small changes had I attributed to my son's concern when they were actually something else entirely? The pill organizer that had appeared on my kitchen counter 3 weeks ago, Carl said it would help me stay organized with my medications. I'd been taking the same blood pressure medicine for 5 years without missing a dose, but suddenly I needed a system designed for people with memory problems, the spare house key I'd apparently given him. I still couldn't remember doing that, which either meant my memory really was going, or the phone calls to my friends that Carl had started making on my behalf. Last month he'd called my neighbor Jerry to cancel our weekly chess games, saying I was feeling under the weather and needed to rest. I'd spent that evening wondering why Jerry hadn't come by, only to learn later that Carl had spoken to him. The gradual disappearance of my car keys. They kept ending up in strange places. The freezer, the bathroom cabinet, inside a kitchen drawer. Carl would find them with remarkable efficiency, always with that concerned expression and gentle suggestion that maybe I should be more careful about where I put things. I walked to my desk and pulled out the leather-bound calendar where I kept track of everything important. The handwriting was mine, steady and clear. The appointments were all correct, the dates properly recorded. My mind was sharp, my memory intact. So why was my own son convinced otherwise? Or was he convinced at all? The thought hit me like ice water. What if Carl wasn't worried about my mental state? What if he was actively working to create the impression that I was declining? I thought about Linda, my daughter-in-law, and how she'd changed toward me over the past year. Where she used to ask my opinion about things, now she spoke to me in that slow, overly loud voice people use with children or the elderly. She'd started explaining simple concepts to me as if I couldn't follow basic conversations. And the way she looked at me sometimes, not with concern, but with calculation, like she was measuring something, weighing options. The pieces were starting to form a picture I didn't want to see, but I forced myself to keep looking. The financial advisor who had called last month, asking about my family's concerns regarding my ability to manage my investments. I'd been handling my own portfolio for 30 years, but apparently Carl had contacted them with questions about my competency. The conversation I'd overheard between Carl and Linda 3 weeks ago, or thought I'd overheard. They'd been speaking in low voices in my kitchen while I dozed in my chair after dinner. Something about making arrangements and it being for the best. At the time, I'd assumed they were talking about vacation plans or work schedules. Now I wondered what arrangements they'd actually been discussing. The real estate agent who had called 2 weeks ago with an assessment of my property value. When I'd asked why she was calling, she'd seemed confused and said someone from my family had requested a market analysis. Carl had claimed he knew nothing about it when I mentioned it to him. I sat back in my chair, the full scope of what was happening beginning to crystallize. This wasn't sudden concern for an aging parent. This was a systematic campaign to establish that I was incompetent, that I needed to be managed, controlled, and eventually removed from my own life. But why? What did Carl gain from having me declared incapable? The answer came to me slowly, like a photograph developing in chemical baths. Control, financial control, property control, life control, and eventually, when I was safely tucked away in whatever facility they'd chosen, complete access to everything I'd worked 40 years to build. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone. I needed to make some calls, ask some questions, find out exactly how far this had already gone. But I had to be careful. If Carl suspected I was onto him, he might accelerate whatever timeline he was working with. I thought about Ryan's innocent words the day before. After my fishing trip, they were planning to send me somewhere permanent, which meant I had maybe a week, maybe less, before my son tried to take away everything that made me who I was. The fishing trip I'd canceled suddenly looked like a gift. Extra time to figure out what was really happening and decide what I was going to do about it. One thing was certain. I wasn't going down without a fight. The discovery came by accident, which made it somehow worse. I was looking for my reading glasses in Carl's old room, the one he still used as an office when he worked from my house, when I knocked over a stack of papers on his desk. As I bent to pick them up, 3 glossy brochures scattered across the hardwood floor. Sunset Manor, a community of care. Golden Years Assisted Living, where dignity meets comfort. Peaceful Pines Nursing Home, affordable excellence in elder care. My hands trembled as I picked up each brochure. They weren't just random promotional materials. They were marked up, annotated. Someone had circled pricing information, highlighted amenities, and made notes in the margins. Carl's handwriting, clear as day. Accepts Medicaid after private pay period, and 2-year waiting list, need to act soon. I sank into his desk chair. The brochures spread before me like evidence in a criminal case. This wasn't some distant plan or casual consideration. These were active research materials. Someone had visited these places, asked detailed questions, started the process of finding somewhere to put me. The worst part was the pricing. Carl had circled the cheapest options, the facilities that looked more like institutions than homes. $800 a month for a shared room at Peaceful Pines, $1,200 for a private room at Sunset Manor, but only if I qualified for their immediate placement program. How long had he been planning this? How many nights had he sat in this chair, in my own house, researching ways to get rid of me? I was so absorbed in the brochures that I almost didn't hear the front door open. Carl's voice carried down the hallway. "I'm just grabbing those papers from Dad's room, honey. Be right back out." Panic shot through me. I quickly gathered the brochures, shoving them back into what I hoped was their original position, and moved to the bookshelf, pretending to browse the old medical textbooks Carl had left behind from college. "Hey, Dad." Carl appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath. "I didn't expect to see you up here." "Just looking for my reading glasses," I said, amazed at how steady my voice sounded. "Thought I might have left them up here yesterday." He nodded, but his eyes went immediately to his desk. Was he checking to see if anything had been disturbed? "Find them?" "No luck. They're probably downstairs somewhere." I headed toward the door, but Carl stepped slightly into my path. "Dad, while I have you here, I wanted to talk to you about something." My heart stopped. Did he know I'd seen the brochures? "What's that?" "Linda and I have been talking, and we're worried about you living alone in this big house. All these stairs, the maintenance, the isolation." His voice had that carefully modulated tone people use when they're delivering rehearsed speeches. "We think it might be time to consider some alternatives." There it was, the conversation I'd been dreading, happening exactly where I'd found the evidence of their plans. "What kind of alternatives?" "Well, there are some really nice communities for people your age, places where you'd have companionship, activities, people to help with meals and medications." He gestured vaguely, as if these places were abstract concepts rather than the specific facilities he'd been researching. No pressure, of course. Just something to think about. "I don't need help with meals and medications, Carl." "I know you don't think you do, but Dad, you're 62. Things change. Your reflexes aren't what they used to be. Your memory has been a little spotty lately." "My memory is fine." "Is it?" He tilted his head with that patient expression that made me want to scream. "You forgot about your doctor's appointment. You've been misplacing your keys. Last week you couldn't remember where you put the insurance papers." Every example he cited was something that had happened after he'd started his increased visits to check on me. Coincidence? I was beginning to doubt it. "Those are normal things, Carl. Everyone misplaces keys sometimes." "Of course they are. But when you add them all up, along with living alone in a house this size, well, Linda and I just want what's best for you." Linda. Always Linda in these conversations, as if she were the concerned daughter-in-law pushing for my welfare. But I was starting to suspect Linda had her own motivations. "What does Linda think is best for me?" Carl's expression shifted slightly, and I caught a glimpse of something calculating behind his concern. "She thinks you'd be happier somewhere with more social interaction, somewhere you wouldn't have to worry about home maintenance and all the responsibilities of property ownership." Property ownership. There it was, buried in the gentle concern about my social life. My house, sitting on 2 acres of prime real estate 20 minutes from downtown, was worth at least $400,000, maybe more in the current market. And what would happen to this house if I moved somewhere else? "Well, we'd handle all of that for you, Dad. Take care of the sale. Make sure you got a fair price. Use the proceeds to help pay for your care." The proceeds to help pay for my care. Not my proceeds to do with as I pleased, but money to be managed by him for expenses he deemed appropriate. I was beginning to understand the scope of what Carl was planning. "That's very thoughtful of you both," I said carefully. "But I'm not ready to make any major changes right now." Carl's patience showed the first crack. "Dad, sometimes we don't get to choose the timing of these things. Sometimes we have to be practical." "What do you mean by that?" "I mean that if something happened to you, if you fell down these stairs or had a medical emergency or just continued to decline, we might not have the luxury of planning ahead. It's better to make these decisions while you're still able to participate in them." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. "Make the decision now, while you still can, or we'll make it for you later." I nodded, as if I understood his reasoning. "You're probably right. Let me think about it." Relief flooded his face. "That's all we ask, Dad. Just think about it." Maybe we could visit a few places together just to see what's available. After Carl left, I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone. Everything was falling into place now. The pattern of small, undermining incidents, the gradual erosion of my independence, the research into facilities. But there was still something I needed to confirm. I picked up the phone and dialed Dr. Peterson's office. Good afternoon. This is David Miller. I understand my son Carl called about rescheduling my appointment. The receptionist sounded confused. Let me check your file, Mr. Miller. I don't show any calls from family members about rescheduling. Your appointment is still set for Thursday at 2 p.m., same as always. My blood turned to ice. Are you sure? He said you'd called him because I seemed confused about the dates. No, sir. We don't have your son listed as an emergency contact, and we wouldn't discuss your appointments with him anyway without written authorization. Did you want to reschedule for some reason? No, I said slowly. Thursday at 2 p.m. is perfect. I hung up the phone and stared at it for a long time. Carl had lied. Completely, smoothly, convincingly lied about something easily verified. Which meant he was probably lying about other things too. I thought about the financial advisor who'd called with concerns about my competency. Had Carl actually contacted them, or had he simply told me he had? What about the real estate agent, the mysterious misplacement of my keys? How much of my recent confusion and forgetfulness was real, and how much was being manufactured by my own son? I walked to my desk and pulled out a legal pad. If Carl was building a case for my incompetency, I needed to start building a defense. Every lie, every manipulation, every attempt to make me seem confused or incapable needed to be documented. The war wasn't just beginning. It had been going on for months. I was just now realizing I was under attack. But if Carl thought he was dealing with a confused old man who would go quietly into whatever facility he'd chosen, he was about to learn how wrong he was. I'd built a successful business from nothing, raised a son alone, and survived 62 years of life's challenges. I wasn't about to surrender now. The law office of Henderson, Walsh & Associates occupied the top floor of a downtown building I remembered helping to finance 30 years ago. Margaret Henderson had been my attorney since I started my construction business, and if anyone could help me navigate this nightmare, it was her. David, she said, rising from behind her mahogany desk, this is unexpected. When you called, you sounded, she paused, studying my face, concerned. That's one word for it. I settled into the leather chair across from her desk, the same chair where I'd signed my will 15 years ago, back when I trusted my son implicitly. Margaret, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. She leaned forward, hands folded. Always. Has Carl contacted you about me? About my mental capacity, my ability to handle my affairs, anything like that? Her expression shifted immediately. The professional smile disappeared, replaced by something more guarded. David. That's answer enough. My stomach clenched. What did he tell you? Margaret was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with attorney-client privilege versus loyalty to a client of 3 decades. Finally, she spoke carefully. Carl came to see me 3 weeks ago. He expressed concerns about your cognitive function and asked about the process for obtaining guardianship should it become necessary. The words hit me like physical blows. Guardianship. My own son had consulted my own attorney about having me declared incompetent. What did you tell him? I told him that guardianship is a serious legal matter that requires clear evidence of incapacity, medical documentation, and court approval. I also told him that you seemed perfectly capable when I saw you at the charity auction last month. She paused. David, are you experiencing any cognitive issues? Any memory problems, confusion, difficulty managing your affairs? None. My mind is as sharp as it's ever been. That's what I thought. Margaret opened a file drawer and pulled out a folder. David, there's something else. Carl also asked about your will, specifically about his role as executor and beneficiary. My hands tightened on the arms of the chair. What about it? He wanted to know if there were any provisions for interim management of your assets if you became incapacitated. He seemed particularly interested in the timeline, how quickly he could assume control if necessary. The picture was becoming clearer and more horrifying by the minute. This wasn't just about getting me out of the way. This was about money, property, control. Carl was positioning himself to take over everything I'd spent my life building. Margaret, I need to know what legal protections I have. If Carl tries to have me declared incompetent, what can I do? She pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. First, you should undergo a comprehensive cognitive evaluation by an independent physician. Document your mental acuity before anyone can claim otherwise. Second, we should consider updating your estate planning documents, power of attorney, healthcare directives, possibly your will. What about the guardianship thing? For Carl to obtain guardianship, he'd need to prove you're unable to make informed decisions about your personal care or finances. That requires medical evidence, usually from multiple sources. The fact that you're here, clearly articulating your concerns and asking intelligent questions about legal protections, would make such a case very difficult to prove. I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders, so I'm not helpless. Far from it. But David, if Carl is actively working toward this goal, time is a factor. Has he suggested any immediate changes to your living situation? I told her about the nursing home brochures, the conversation about moving to a community, the timeline that seemed to coincide with my fishing trip. Margaret's expression grew more serious with each detail. He's moving faster than I would have expected, she said. David, I'm going to be blunt. If someone is trying to have you declared incompetent for financial gain, and they have access to your home, your mail, your daily routine, they can create evidence of confusion and incapacity, misplaced items, missed appointments, even medication mix-ups. You think Carl has been sabotaging me? I think you need to consider that possibility. She leaned back in her chair. David, do you trust your son? The question hung in the air between us. 3 days ago, I would have said absolutely. Carl was my boy, the child I'd raised alone, the man I'd been proud to call my son. But now? I don't know anymore. Margaret nodded. Then we need to proceed as if you don't. I'm going to draft some new documents for you, a revocable living trust, updated powers of attorney that specifically exclude Carl unless certain conditions are met, and new healthcare directives. I'm also going to recommend you change your banking arrangements. What do you mean? If Carl has any access to your accounts, even as a secondary contact for emergencies, remove it immediately. Open new accounts if necessary. Make sure all your financial information goes only to you. I thought about how Carl had somehow known about the financial advisor's supposed call, how he'd managed to reschedule medical appointments that had never needed rescheduling. How much access did he actually have to my personal information? Margaret, if Carl has been checking my accounts or accessing my medical records somehow, is that legal? Absolutely not. If he's obtained access to your private information without authorization, that's fraud at minimum, possibly identity theft depending on how he's done it. She made more notes. David, I want you to think carefully about the past few months. Any instances where you've been surprised by information Carl had, times when he knew things he shouldn't have known. The list was longer than I wanted to admit. Bills he'd mentioned that I hadn't discussed with him. Medical information he'd referenced that I'd never shared. Even details about my fishing trip that I'd only mentioned to my friends. There's been quite a bit, I admitted. Then we need to move quickly. I'll have the new documents ready by tomorrow afternoon. In the meantime, I want you to do several things. She handed me a list she'd been writing. First, get that cognitive evaluation I mentioned. Second, document everything you can remember about Carl's behavior over the past 6 months. Third, change your passwords for any online accounts. Fourth, check your credit reports for any unusual activity. I stood to leave, feeling simultaneously relieved and terrified. At least now I had a plan, but the scope of what Carl might have already done was overwhelming. Margaret, one more thing. If Carl tries to move forward with guardianship proceedings, will you represent me? Absolutely. David, you've been my client for 30 years. If someone is trying to take advantage of you, even if that someone is your son, I'll fight it every step of the way. Driving home, I made a detour to the bank. My conversation with the branch manager was enlightening and disturbing in equal measure. Mr. Miller, I do show that your son Carl was added as an authorized contact on your accounts about 2 months ago, she said, scrolling through her computer screen. Do you remember signing those authorization forms? I didn't, but Carl had been handling some banking errands for me around that time. Or so I'd thought. What kind of access does that give him? He can't make withdrawals or transfers, but he can access account balances, transaction histories, and receive copies of statements. Is there a problem? I want him removed immediately. Of course, I'll need you to sign some new forms. As she prepared the paperwork, I thought about Carl sitting in his office in my house, surrounded by nursing home brochures with full access to my financial information. He knew exactly how much money I had, where it was invested, what my monthly expenses were. He'd been building his case with my own bank records. The final stop was Dr. Peterson's office. I explained that I needed a comprehensive cognitive evaluation, and why. Dr. Peterson, who'd been my physician for 15 years, looked genuinely shocked. "David, you're one of the sharpest patients I have. Your memory, reasoning ability, decision-making capacity, all completely normal for someone your age. Then why would my son think otherwise?" "I have no idea. But I'll schedule you for a full neuropsychological evaluation this week. We'll document everything: memory, processing speed, executive function, the works. If someone is questioning your mental capacity, we'll have objective proof that they're wrong." That evening, I sat in my living room with a cup of coffee and began writing. Everything I could remember about the past 6 months, every conversation with Carl that had left me feeling confused or diminished, every incident that had made me question my own capabilities. The list filled 4 pages. I was just finishing when I heard Carl's key in the front door again. But this time, instead of announcing himself, he moved quietly through the house. I heard him in his office upstairs, the soft sound of papers rustling. I crept up the stairs and peered around the corner. Carl was at his desk, adding new papers to a manila folder. On top of the stack, I could see the letterhead of Peaceful Pines Nursing Home. He wasn't just researching anymore. He was filing applications. My son was trying to have me committed, and he planned to do it soon, but now I was ready for him. I spent 2 days preparing for what I knew would be the most important conversation of my life. The cognitive evaluation results sat in a manila envelope on my kitchen table. Perfect scores across every metric, with Dr. Peterson's written assessment that I showed no signs of cognitive decline or incapacity. Margaret had delivered the new legal documents that morning, officially revoking Carl's access to anything involving my finances or healthcare decisions. Now came the hard part. "Carl," I said when he answered his phone, "I'd like to have a family meeting tonight. You, Linda, and me. There are some things we need to discuss." I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. He thought I was ready to surrender. "Of course, Dad. What time works for you?" 7 o'clock. "Here at the house. Should I bring anything? Any particular topics you want to cover?" "Just yourselves," I said. "I'll handle the rest." They arrived promptly at 7, Carl carrying a leather briefcase that I suspected contained more nursing home paperwork. Linda wore the kind of sympathetic expression people practice in mirrors before difficult conversations. They settled onto my living room couch like a unified front, ready to deliver whatever speech they'd rehearsed. "Dad," Carl began, "Linda and I are so glad you're ready to talk about this. We know it's not easy, but before we start," I interrupted, "I have something for you both." I handed Carl a thick envelope. He opened it with the confidence of someone expecting good news, but his expression changed as he read the first page. "What is this?" "Cognitive evaluation results from Dr. Peterson. Neuropsychological testing, memory assessments, executive function analysis. Perfect scores across the board." I settled back in my recliner, watching his face. Turns out my mind is as sharp as it's ever been. Linda leaned over to read the documents, her practiced sympathy flickering slightly. "Well, that's wonderful news, David. We're so relieved." "Are you?" I asked, because 3 weeks ago, Carl told my attorney that he was concerned about my cognitive decline. He asked about guardianship procedures. Carl's face went white. "Dad, I was just what? Just planning to have me declared incompetent so you could control my assets?" "That's not what happened." Carl's voice was defensive now, the careful patience gone. I was asking hypothetical questions, trying to understand what options might be available if you ever needed help. Hypothetical. I reached for another envelope from the side table. "Is this hypothetical too?" I spread the Peaceful Pines application across the coffee table between us. Carl's signature was clearly visible on the bottom of the first page, along with a date from 5 days ago. His face went from white to gray. "Where did you get that?" "From your desk upstairs. The same desk where you've been keeping nursing home brochures for the past month." I leaned forward. "Carl, you didn't just research facilities. You started the admission process." Linda finally spoke, her voice tight. "David, we were only trying to help. Carl was worried about you living alone in this big house, and we thought..." "You thought what?" "That you could ship me off somewhere without my knowledge or consent." "It wasn't like that," Carl said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We were just exploring options in case you ever needed them." "Options for what?" Carl glanced at Linda, some silent communication passing between them. When he looked back at me, something had shifted in his expression. The mask of concerned son was slipping, revealing something harder underneath. Dad, you're 62 years old. You're not getting any younger, and this house is too much for you to handle alone. We're trying to plan ahead before you can't make these decisions for yourself. But I can make these decisions for myself. The cognitive evaluation proves that. One test doesn't mean anything, Linda interjected. People can have good days and bad days. Just because you did well on some doctor's quiz doesn't mean you're capable of managing a house this size, or handling your finances, or what? Making decisions about my own life? Carl set down the application papers and looked directly at me. Dad, whether you want to admit it or not, you're declining. You forget things. You misplace items. You get confused about appointments. We've all seen it. Have you? Or have you been creating it? Silence filled the room. Linda's carefully maintained expression cracked slightly, and Carl's jaw tightened. What's that supposed to mean? I reached for my legal pad, the one where I'd documented months of incidents. It means I've been keeping track. Every time you've told me about a missed appointment that I never missed. Every time you've found my keys in strange places. Every call you've made to my friends, canceling plans I never wanted to cancel. Carl's breathing had changed, becoming shallow and quick. Dad, you're being paranoid. Am I? Let's talk about my appointment with Dr. Peterson. You told me his office called you because I seemed confused about the dates. But when I called them directly, they said they'd never contacted you. They don't even have you listed as an emergency contact. Linda shifted uncomfortably on the couch. Maybe there was a miscommunication. Maybe Carl lied. I flipped a page in my notes. Let's talk about my bank accounts. 2 months ago, Carl somehow became an authorized contact without my knowledge. He's been monitoring my finances, tracking my spending, building a case that I'm irresponsible with money. I was trying to help, Carl said, but his voice was weaker now. Help yourself to information you had no right to access. I closed the notebook and set it aside. Carl, I know what you've been doing. The question is why. He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw the exact moment when he decided to stop pretending. His posture changed, his expression hardened, and when he spoke, it was with a coldness I'd never heard from him before. Because you're being selfish. The word hung in the air like a slap. Selfish? You're sitting in a $400,000 house that you don't need, hoarding money that could be put to better use. Refusing to acknowledge that you're getting older and less capable. Carl stood up, pacing to the window. Linda and I have been watching you decline for months, but you're too proud to admit it. What decline? What specific examples of decline? You don't cook proper meals anymore. You eat cereal for dinner half the time. By choice, not inability. You don't maintain this house properly. The gutters need cleaning, the deck needs staining, I hire people for that work now. That's called being smart, not declining. Carl whirled around, his composure finally cracking completely. You don't need a house this size. You don't need all this space, all this responsibility. Ryan could have his own room here. Linda could have her art studio. We could... There it was. The truth, finally out in the open. You want my house? Linda spoke for the first time in several minutes, her voice bitter. We've been living in that cramped townhouse for 8 years, David. 8 years of listening to neighbors through thin walls, of having no space for anything. Meanwhile, you rattle around in this place like some kind of ghost. So you decided to have me declared incompetent and shipped off somewhere so you could move in. We decided to face reality, Carl said. You're alone, Dad. You have no social life, no hobbies, no purpose. At least in a care facility, you'd have activities, companionship, people to look after you. People to look after me at $800 a month while you live in my $400,000 house. Carl's face flushed red. This isn't about money. Isn't it? I stood up, feeling stronger than I had in months. Then explain to me why you researched the cheapest facilities available. Explain why you were so interested in the timeline for taking control of my assets. Explain why you lied to my attorney, my doctor, my bank. Because you wouldn't listen to reason. Carl exploded. Every time we tried to talk to you about making sensible changes, you shut us down. We had to find another way to help you. Help me, or help yourselves. Linda stood up too, her mask of concern completely gone now. David, we've sacrificed for this family. Carl has spent every weekend for 2 years doing maintenance on this house, managing your affairs, making sure you're okay. We deserve some consideration. Consideration? Yes. My house and my life savings? No. Carl grabbed his briefcase and headed for the door. Fine. If you want to be stubborn and selfish, that's your choice. but don't expect us to keep sacrificing our lives to take care of someone who refuses to be reasonable. I never asked you to sacrifice anything. I asked you to respect my choices." He paused at the door, his hand on the knob. "You'll regret this, Dad. When you're sitting here alone, when something happens and there's no one to help you, you'll wish you'd listened to us." "Maybe. But at least I'll be making my own mistakes instead of having them made for me." After they left, I sat in my living room listening to the silence. The house felt different somehow. Lighter, cleaner, as if something toxic had been removed from the air. I walked to my desk and pulled out the new legal documents Margaret had prepared. Tomorrow I would file them officially, ensuring that Carl could never again access my personal information or make decisions about my life without my explicit consent. But tonight, I just sat with the truth. My son had tried to steal my life, and I had stopped him. The real question now was what to do with the life I'd saved. 3 months after the confrontation with Carl, I stood in the kitchen of my new home, watching the sunrise paint the mountains pink through floor-to-ceiling windows. Aspen Ridge Active Adult Community wasn't what most people would call a retirement home. It was more like a resort where everyone happened to be over 55. The decision to move had surprised everyone, including myself. But after weeks of Carl's escalating harassment, angry phone calls, unexpected visits where he'd berate me about my selfishness, and Linda's passive-aggressive comments to anyone who would listen, I realized that staying in my old house meant staying in their orbit. So I sold it. The $420,000 sale price had funded this new chapter beautifully. My condo here cost half that amount, leaving me with a substantial nest egg and monthly homeowners' fees that covered maintenance, landscaping, and access to amenities I'd never dreamed of having. The community center had a fitness facility, art studios, a library, and a woodworking shop that reminded me why I'd loved building things in the first place. "David, you ready for our hike?" Joan called from the hallway. I smiled, grabbing my jacket and water bottle. Joan Martinez had been my neighbor for exactly 6 weeks, and in that time she'd become something I hadn't expected to find at 62, a genuine companion. We'd met at the community book club, bonded over our shared love of mystery novels and our mutual frustration with children who thought they knew what was best for us. Joan's story was different from mine, but familiar in its broad strokes. Her daughter lived in California and called once a month with suggestions about how Joan should be living her life. The suggestions always involved selling her possessions, moving closer to family, and generally becoming smaller and less inconvenient. "I spent 40 years being a wife and mother," Joan had told me over coffee last week. "I loved every minute of it, but now I want to be myself for a while. Is that selfish?" It wasn't selfish. It was human. We drove to the trailhead in Joan's SUV, chatting about the book club's latest selection and the community's upcoming talent show. The conversation was easy, comfortable in a way my interactions with Carl hadn't been for years. "Can I ask you something personal?" Joan said as we started up the trail. "Shoot. Do you miss him, your son?" I considered the question while we climbed over a fallen log. I miss who I thought he was. The Carl I raised, the one who used to call just to check in without an agenda. But that person either never existed or he changed into someone I don't recognize. My daughter keeps telling me I'm being stubborn by staying in Colorado instead of moving to San Diego to be closer to her grandchildren, Joan said. She says I'm prioritizing my independence over family relationships. Are you? Maybe. But shouldn't family relationships include respecting each other's choices? We hiked in comfortable silence for a while, the mountain air filling my lungs with something that felt like possibility. At 62, I was in better shape than I'd been in 20 years. The daily walks around the community, the access to the fitness center, and the general lack of stress had done wonders for my blood pressure and energy levels. "There's something I haven't told you," I said as we reached a scenic overlook. Joan raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "I have a grandson, Ryan. He's 5, and I haven't seen him since the fight with Carl. That must be hard." "It is, but I've been working with my attorney to establish legal visitation rights. Turns out grandparents have more options than I realized, especially when there's documented evidence of the parents trying to isolate the child from a loving grandparent for vindictive reasons." Joan sat down on a boulder and patted the space beside her. "Tell me about him." So I did. I told her about Ryan's curiosity, his innocent questions, the way he'd light up when I taught him about tools or helped him build things with blocks. I told her about the fishing trip we'd planned before everything fell apart, and how I'd promised to teach him to tie knots and identify bird calls. "He sounds wonderful," Joan said. "He is. And he deserves better than being used as a weapon between adults." "What does your attorney think about the visitation case?" "She's optimistic, especially since Carl's behavior after our confrontation has been less than stellar." That was an understatement. Carl had spent the weeks following our family meeting alternating between angry demands that I see reason and attempts to turn other family members against me. He'd called my sister in Phoenix, painting me as a stubborn old man who was refusing reasonable help from loving children. He'd contacted my neighbors, expressing concern about my mental state and my rash decision to move away from family support. The strategy had backfired spectacularly when several people started asking questions about Carl's behavior. My sister, who remembered Carl as a somewhat selfish child who'd grown into a demanding adult, had called me directly to get my side of the story. After hearing about the attempted guardianship and the nursing home research, she'd offered to testify on my behalf if needed. The neighbors, meanwhile, had been puzzled by Carl's claims of my mental decline, since they'd seen me regularly maintaining my property, hosting coherent conversations, and generally appearing to be a competent adult right up until the day I moved. "The beautiful thing about the truth," Margaret had told me, "is that it's consistent. Lies require constant maintenance." Carl's lies were indeed requiring maintenance, and he wasn't managing it well. My phone buzzed with a text message. Margaret's name appeared on the screen. "Judge approved supervised visitation. First visit scheduled for Saturday. Congratulations." I showed the message to Joan, whose face lit up. "David, that's wonderful. You must be thrilled." I was thrilled, but also nervous. It had been 3 months since I'd seen Ryan. Would he remember me? Would Carl have poisoned him against me somehow? "What will you do with him for the visit?" "There's a children's museum downtown, interactive exhibits, hands-on activities, and there's a park next door where we can feed the ducks." I paused, thinking about 5-year-old attention spans. "I just want him to know I didn't disappear by choice." Saturday morning arrived crisp and clear. The supervised visitation center was a cheerful place designed to feel more like a community center than a legal facility. The supervisor, a kind woman named Mrs. Patterson, explained the rules briefly, and then led me to a playroom where Ryan was waiting. He looked up when I walked in, and his face broke into the biggest smile I'd seen in months. "Grandpa, where did you go? Mom said you moved to a mountain." I knelt down and hugged him, feeling 3 months of tension melt away. "I did move to a mountain, buddy. I have a new house with big windows and hiking trails right outside my door. Can I see it sometime? I hope so. But today, how about we go to the Children's Museum? I heard they have a whole section where you can build things." Ryan's eyes widened. "Really? Can we build a birdhouse like you promised? They might not have wood and nails, but I bet we can figure out something even better." The museum was everything I'd hoped for. Ryan threw himself into every exhibit with the enthusiasm only children possess, and I found myself laughing more than I had in months. We built towers in the engineering section, conducted experiments in the science lab, and created art projects that were more enthusiasm than skill. At the duck pond afterward, Ryan chattered nonstop about his kindergarten class, his new friend Marcus, and the treehouse he wanted to build in his backyard someday. "Grandpa, why don't you live in your old house anymore?" The question I'd been dreading. I chose my words carefully. Sometimes adults need to make changes in their lives, buddy. I decided I wanted to try living somewhere new, where I could go hiking and meet new friends. "Are you happy in your new house?" "Very happy. And you know what? There's a room there that would be perfect for a grandson to visit sometime." Ryan's face lit up. "Really? With bunk beds?" "We could talk about bunk beds." As our visit wound down, Ryan threw his arms around my neck. "I missed you, Grandpa. Will I see you again soon?" "I hope so, buddy. I missed you too." Driving back to Aspen Ridge that evening, I felt lighter than I had in years. The supervised visits would continue for a few months, but Margaret was confident we could transition to unsupervised time soon. Carl's behavior during the custody proceedings had not impressed the judge, particularly his attempts to deny Ryan access to a grandparent who posed no danger and had been a consistent presence in the child's life. The court recognizes that children benefit from stable relationships with extended family members, the judge had written in his decision. Mr. Carl Miller's attempts to sever this relationship appear to be motivated by personal animosity rather than concerns for the child's welfare. Back home, I found Joan reading on her patio, a glass of wine catching the last rays of sunlight. "How did it go?" she asked. "Better than I dared hope." I settled into the chair beside her. "He wants to see my new house. Specifically, he wants to know if there could be bunk beds in the guest room." Joan laughed. "Bunk beds might be negotiable. I'm thinking so." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the mountains turn purple in the fading light. 6 months ago, I'd been a man slowly losing control of his life to people who claimed to love him. Tonight, I was someone with choices, with autonomy, with genuine relationships built on mutual respect, rather than obligation or control. "You know what I realized today?" I said. "What's that?" "For the first time in years, maybe decades, I'm living my life instead of just managing it." Joan raised her wine glass. "To living life." "To freedom," I countered, touching my water glass to hers. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, the future felt full of possibilities rather than restrictions. I was 62 years old, and instead of being shipped off to someone else's idea of appropriate care, I was building something new, something that was entirely, authentically mine. The mountains stretched out before us, vast and beautiful and full of trails I hadn't explored yet. Tomorrow, Joan and I were planning to check out the community garden, where I was thinking about growing vegetables again for the first time since Ryan's grandmother died. Life, I was learning, could begin again at any age. You just had to be brave enough to choose it.